The rain started before sunrise, turning the narrow roads of Millbrook into rivers of gray water and mud. Emma Carter sat quietly inside her old sedan outside the church parking lot, staring through the windshield while people dressed in black slowly entered the building. Her fingers tightened around the folded funeral program resting in her lap. At the top, written in elegant silver letters, were the words, "In loving memory of Walter Carter." Emma swallowed hard. For 3 years, Grandpa Walter had been the center of her life, while the rest of the family stayed busy chasing vacations, promotions, and parties. Emma had spent countless nights beside his hospital bed, listening to the slow beep of heart monitors. She had cooked his meals, organized his medication, and held his hand during the nights when his pain became unbearable. And now he was gone. A sharp knock against her car window startled her. Her cousin Olivia stood outside holding an umbrella, her expensive makeup untouched by the rain. Even at a funeral, she looked ready for a magazine photo shoot. "You coming?" Olivia asked impatiently. Emma nodded and stepped out into the cold rain. The church smelled of candles and wet coats. Soft piano music echoed through the room, while people whispered fake condolences to one another. Emma spotted her Uncle Richard, standing near the front, shaking hands dramatically like a politician during an election campaign. "There she is," he announced loudly when he saw Emma, the devoted granddaughter. Several people turned toward her. Emma forced a polite smile. Richard wrapped an arm around her shoulders, but the gesture felt cold and rehearsed. "Your grandfather loved you dearly," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Emma remembered the last time Richard visited Grandpa. 6 months earlier, he had stormed out of the hospital room after screaming about property taxes and business shares. Now he acted heartbroken. Aunt Diane approached with a tissue pressed against her cheek. "This is just so difficult for all of us." Emma noticed there were no actual tears. Before she could answer, Jason walked over while checking something on his phone. "You know," he muttered, "Grandpa's estate is probably worth millions now. That land alone." "Jason," Diane whispered sharply. "What?" He shrugged. "I'm just saying." Emma looked away in disgust. The funeral service began minutes later. The priest spoke kindly about Grandpa Walter's generosity, wisdom, and hard work. Emma barely heard most of it. Her attention stayed fixed on the polished wooden coffin at the front of the church. She remembered Grandpa teaching her how to ride a bicycle when she was 8. She remembered sitting beside him in the workshop while he carved tiny wooden animals by hand. She remembered his rough voice saying, "People show their true hearts when money gets involved, Emma. Never forget that." At the time, she thought it was just another old lesson. Now those words felt heavier. When the service ended, people slowly walked outside toward the cemetery behind the church. Rain soaked Emma's black coat as she stood near the grave watching workers lower the coffin into the ground. Her chest tightened painfully. This was final. No more evening phone calls. No more warm smiles. No more Grandpa. Emma stepped forward and gently dropped a white rose onto the coffin. "I'll miss you," she whispered. Behind her, Richard sniffed dramatically for attention, while Diane leaned into guests pretending to cry. Emma suddenly felt exhausted. After the burial, the family drove directly to Grandpa's mansion for the reading of the will. The large countryside house stood silently beneath dark clouds, its windows glowing softly against the rain. Emma's stomach twisted as she entered. Everything still smelled like Grandpa's coffee and old books. His favorite chair remained beside the fireplace with a folded blanket, it draped neatly over one arm. For a second, Emma almost expected him to walk into the room complaining about the weather. Instead, Mr. Bennett, Grandpa's longtime lawyer, sat waiting near the dining table with several folders spread before him. "Thank you all for coming," he said carefully. Richard immediately sat at the head of the table like he already owned the house. Olivia whispered to Jason, "I wonder who gets the lake property." Emma stayed quiet near the far corner. Mr. Bennet adjusted his glasses nervously. "As requested by Walter Carter, I will now read the official will." The room fell silent. "To my son Richard Carter, I leave 40% of my financial assets." Richard smiled proudly. "To my daughter Diane Carter, I leave 30%. Diane closed her eyes dramatically, as if overwhelmed with emotion. "To my grandchildren Jason and Olivia, I leave investment accounts totaling $500,000 each." Jason grinned instantly. Emma felt her heartbeat quicken. Then came a pause. Mr. Bennet looked directly at her. "And to my granddaughter Emma Carter," the room turned toward her, "I leave my workshop key and a personal letter." Silence filled the mansion. Then Jason laughed. "A key," he said, seriously. Olivia covered her smile while Richard leaned back comfortably in his chair. Emma stared blankly at the small rusted key Mr. Bennet placed in her trembling hand. "That's all," she whispered softly. Mr. Bennet hesitated. "Those were your grandfather's instructions." Heat burned behind Emma's eyes. 3 years caring for Grandpa. 3 years sacrificing everything. And this was all she received, a useless key. And a letter. Emma barely remembered driving home from the mansion that night. The rain blurred the streets outside her windshield, while Grandpa's rusted workshop key rested heavily in her coat pocket. Every few minutes, she tightened her grip around the steering wheel to stop her hands from shaking. By the time she reached her apartment, exhaustion crushed her entire body. The small apartment felt colder than usual. Unpaid bills covered the kitchen counter beside a half-empty coffee mug and stacks of job applications she had never finished. Emma dropped her purse onto the couch and slowly sat beside the window. For 3 years, her world had revolved around Grandpa Walter. Now she had nothing. Meanwhile, her family was probably sitting in Grandpa's mansion, celebrating their inheritance with expensive wine. The thought made her stomach twist painfully. Emma pulled the envelope from her coat pocket again. Grandpa's familiar handwriting covered the front. "For my Emma," her eyes filled with tears instantly. Carefully, she unfolded the letter once more. "My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, it means the truth is hidden exactly where it always belonged. Trust your heart, not your anger." Grandpa Emma stared at the words for several long moments. "The truth is hidden exactly where it always belonged." She whispered the sentence aloud. Then suddenly, something clicked in her mind. "The workshop," she murmured. Grandpa spent more time in that old workshop than anywhere else in the world. Even after his health declined, he still talked about it constantly. He called it his safe place. Emma's pulse quickened. Maybe the key wasn't meaningless after all. Without allowing herself time to doubt, Emma grabbed her coat again and rushed back outside. The rain had weakened into a cold mist as she drove toward the countryside mansion. Darkness covered the property when she arrived. Most lights inside the mansion were still glowing. Her family hadn't gone to sleep yet. Emma parked far down the gravel road and quietly walked toward the back garden, careful not to make noise. Wet grass soaked through her shoes while wind rustled the trees overhead. Then she saw it, the workshop. The small wooden building sat behind the mansion exactly as Grandpa had left it. Ivy crawled along the walls, and dust covered the narrow windows. Memories hit Emma instantly. Grandpa teaching her how to sand wood. Grandpa humming old songs while fixing broken furniture. Grandpa smiling proudly whenever she helped him build something. Emma's throat tightened. She slowly pulled the rusted key from her pocket and inserted it into the lock. For one terrifying second, nothing happened, then click, the door creaked open. A wave of dust and old wood scent filled the air. Emma stepped inside carefully. Moonlight slipped through the windows, revealing shelves crowded with tools, paint cans, and unfinished carvings. Grandpa's old workbench stood in the center, exactly as he had left it years ago. Everything felt frozen in time. Emma brushed trembling fingers across the wooden table. "I'm here, Grandpa," she whispered softly, then something caught her attention. One drawer near the workbench was slightly open. Emma slowly pulled it wider. Inside sat several notebooks, folders, and old cassette tapes stacked neatly together. Her heartbeat accelerated. She grabbed the top notebook and opened it carefully. The first page made her blood run cold. "Richard keeps pressuring me about changing the will again." Emma froze. She flipped to another page. "Diane believes I don't notice the missing money from my accounts. I notice everything." A chill moved down her spine. Page after page described arguments, threats, and suspicious behavior from her family members. Then Emma reached an entry dated only 2 months earlier. "If anything happens suddenly to me, Emma must know the truth. Richard is desperate now." Emma covered her mouth. "No," she whispered. Her breathing became uneven as she opened one of the folders beside the journals. Inside were photocopies of bank transfers, property documents, and legal forms with signatures that looked wrong. Very wrong. Some of Grandpa's signatures appeared shaky and unnatural, like someone had forced him to sign. Emma's stomach twisted violently. Her own family had betrayed him. Tears burned her eyes as anger slowly replaced heartbreak. Then she noticed the cassette tapes. Each tape had handwritten labels: "Meeting with Richard," "Hospital Conversation," "Final Instructions." Emma quickly searched the workshop until she found Grandpa's old cassette player sitting on a dusty shelf. Her hands shook while inserting the tape labeled "Final Instructions." The machine crackled loudly. Then Grandpa's voice filled the room. Weak, tired, but unmistakably his. "If you're hearing this, Emma, then I was right not to trust them." Emma's breath stopped. "They think I'm confused because I'm old and sick." Grandpa continued sadly, "But I know exactly what Richard and Diane are trying to do." Tears streamed down Emma's cheeks. "I created another will with Bennett months ago, a protected one. I needed proof first." Emma pressed her hand against her mouth to stop herself from crying aloud. "Grandpa knew everything," the recording continued. "You were the only person who cared for me without asking for money. That matters more than wealth ever will." Emma closed her eyes tightly. Then Grandpa's tone changed slightly. "And Emma, beneath this workshop lies the final truth." Suddenly, loud pounding exploded against the workshop door. Emma jumped in fear. "Emma?" Richard's angry voice shouted from outside. "I know you're in there." Panic rushed through her body instantly. She looked around wildly. Then she noticed something strange beneath Grandpa's desk, a loose wooden floor panel. Emma dropped to her knees and pulled it upward. Underneath sat a small steel lockbox hidden beneath the floorboards. Her heart pounded violently as she lifted it out. Inside were sealed legal documents, stock certificates, property deeds, and one final envelope with her name written across the front. Outside, Richard pounded harder. "Open this door right now." But Emma no longer felt helpless. For the first time since Grandpa died, she realized something important. Her grandfather had never abandoned her. He had been protecting her all along. Emma barely slept that night. The steel lockbox sat on her kitchen table, while Grandpa's hidden recordings echoed endlessly inside her mind. Every document she examined revealed another layer of betrayal: forged signatures, unauthorized bank withdrawals, property transfers prepared before Grandpa had even died. Her own family had been planning this for months. By sunrise, Emma no longer felt like the broken girl. who had left the mansion humiliated after the will reading. Now she felt angry, but beneath that anger was something even stronger, purpose. She carefully opened the final envelope Grandpa had hidden inside the lockbox. Inside was a short handwritten note. Emma, if you found this, then you found the truth. Take everything to Mr. Bennet immediately. Do not confront them alone. I trust you to finish what I could not. Grandpa Emma wiped her tears and reached for her phone. An hour later, she sat inside Mr. Bennet's downtown law office while he silently reviewed the evidence spread across his desk. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, but the room felt tense and heavy. The elderly lawyer removed his glasses slowly. My God, he whispered. Emma clasped her trembling hands together. You knew something was wrong, didn't you, Mr. Bennet sighed deeply. Your grandfather suspected Richard was manipulating him during the last year of his illness. He admitted. That's why we prepared a second protected will. He looked down at the papers again, but I never imagined the fraud had become this extensive. Emma swallowed hard. Can they really get away with this? Mr. Bennet's expression sharpened instantly. No, he said firmly. Not after this. For the first time in days, Emma felt a small sense of hope. By afternoon, emergency legal notices had already been sent to every family member. Grandpa's financial accounts were temporarily frozen pending investigation. Property ownership transfers were halted immediately. And Richard Carter was furious. Emma found out that evening when her phone exploded with incoming calls. 17 missed calls, 9 angry voice messages, 1 final text from Richard. You think you can destroy this family? Emma stared at the message calmly before locking her phone. For years, she had been afraid of upsetting her family. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of standing alone. Not anymore. 2 days later, Mr. Bennet arranged an official family meeting at the mansion. Emma arrived just before sunset. The large house looked different now, colder somehow, empty. As she stepped through the front doors, angry voices echoed from the dining room. This is ridiculous. Diane snapped. Richard slammed papers onto the table. That girl stole private documents. Jason paced nervously, while Olivia sat silently near the fireplace, her face pale with worry. The moment Emma entered the room, silence fell heavily over everyone. Richard's eyes burned with rage. There she is. He growled. Emma remained calm. Hello, Uncle Richard. How dare you accuse us of fraud? Diane shouted. After everything this family has done for you, Emma almost laughed at the hypocrisy. Everything they had done for her. They had ignored her for years unless they needed something. Mr. Bennet entered carrying several folders. His serious expression immediately silenced the room. Please sit down. He instructed firmly. Nobody argued. The lawyer placed a cassette recorder onto the table beside stacks of legal documents. Richard's confidence seemed to weaken slightly. Mr. Bennet cleared his throat. After reviewing newly discovered evidence hidden by Walter Carter before his death, we have confirmed multiple instances of attempted inheritance, fraud, financial manipulation, and document forgery. Diane gasped dramatically. That's impossible. Mr. Bennet ignored her. These records include illegal transfers from Mr. Carter's personal accounts, forged signatures on estate documents, and recorded conversations. Jason looked slowly toward his father. Dad, he whispered nervously. Richard stood suddenly. This is nonsense. But then Mr. Bennet pressed play on the cassette recorder. Grandpa's voice filled the room. If you continue threatening me over the will, Richard, I'll remove you entirely. Everyone froze. Then Richard's recorded voice answered angrily. You owe this family that money. Emma watched the color drain from Diane's face. Another recording played. This time, Grandpa sounded exhausted. Stop changing papers while I'm medicated. Olivia covered her mouth. Jason stepped backward slowly like he no longer recognized his own father. No, he muttered. Richard pointed furiously toward Emma. She planned this? No. Emma replied quietly. Grandpa did. Mr. Bennett opened the final folder. Walter Carter's protected will contains a special clause, he explained. If evidence of fraud or coercion was discovered after his death, all inheritance distributions would immediately become void. The room became deathly silent. Then came the final blow, the entire Carter estate, Mr. Bennett continued carefully, including the mansion, land ownership, investment accounts, and company shares, transfers solely to Emma Carter. Diane nearly collapsed into her chair. Olivia stared blankly ahead. Jason whispered one word, everything. Mr. Bennett nodded. Richard exploded with rage. That old man tricked us. Emma slowly stood from her chair. No, she said calmly. Grandpa tested you. Richard moved toward her aggressively. You think you've won. For a brief moment, the old Emma might have stepped backward in fear, but not this Emma. She met his furious stare without moving. I didn't want your money, she said softly. I wanted a family. The words hit the room harder than shouting ever could. Even Diane looked ashamed. Tears filled Jason's eyes as he lowered his head, because deep down they all knew the truth. Grandpa hadn't destroyed the family. Greed had. Mr. Bennett handed Emma the final legal documents. As she signed them, Emma looked around the room one last time. These people had humiliated her, lied to her, treated Grandpa like a bank account instead of a father. Yet strangely, Emma no longer hated them. Because Grandpa's final gift wasn't just wealth. It was freedom. And for the first time in years, Emma finally felt strong enough to walk away from people who never truly loved her. The Carter mansion felt strangely peaceful after the investigation ended. For weeks, lawyers, accountants, and investigators had moved through the house collecting records and freezing fraudulent accounts. News of Richard Carter's financial crimes spread quickly through Millbrook, destroying the reputation he had spent years building. People who once admired him now crossed the street to avoid him. Diane quietly moved into a small apartment across town after most of her inheritance vanished in legal penalties. Olivia stopped posting glamorous photos online. Jason disappeared almost entirely, ashamed of everything his family had done. And through it all, Emma stayed silent. She never celebrated their downfall. She never insulted them publicly. Because every time anger tried to take control of her heart, she remembered Grandpa Walter sitting beside the workshop window years ago, smiling gently as he carved wood with rough hands. Bitterness can destroy good people, Emma. He once told her, don't let pain turn you cruel. Those words guided her now. One cold autumn morning, Emma stood alone in Grandpa's workshop, holding the final folder Mr. Bennett had given her after the estate transfer completed. On the front were simple handwritten words, Walter's final instructions. Emma slowly opened it. Inside sat several legal papers, property maps, and one last letter addressed directly to her. Her chest tightened instantly. She unfolded the letter carefully. My dear Emma, if you are reading this, then my final plan worked exactly as I hoped. First, forgive me for allowing you to feel hurt after the first will reading. I know how painful that moment must have been, but I needed the family to reveal who they truly were when they believed money was within reach. Tears filled Emma's eyes immediately. She continued reading. Wealth changes people. Sometimes it exposes greed hidden for years. I watched our family slowly drift apart while everyone fought over things that never truly mattered. But you stayed kind even when life gave you every reason not to be. Emma wiped her cheeks carefully. Outside the workshop window, orange autumn leaves drifted across the yard. The mansion, company shares, and hidden investment accounts now belong entirely to you. Not because you cared for me expecting a reward, but because you loved me when nobody else bothered to try. That is the greatest inheritance any person can leave behind. Emma pressed the letter against her chest. For the first time since Grandpa died, her grief softened slightly, not disappeared, but softened. Then she noticed one final paragraph. There is one more surprise waiting in the Western property barn. You'll know what to do with it. I love you forever. Oh, Grandpa, Emma smiled through tears. Always mysterious. She whispered softly. Later that afternoon, she walked across the large western field behind the mansion toward the old red barn Grandpa, rarely allowed anyone to enter. Wind rolled through the tall grass while clouds drifted slowly overhead. The barn doors creaked loudly as she stepped inside. Dust floated through sunlight pouring from broken roof panels. At first, the building looked empty except for old farming equipment covered in sheets. But then Emma noticed a wooden chest sitting near the far wall. Her pulse quickened. She knelt beside it and lifted the lid carefully. Inside were dozens of folders, photographs, and handwritten business records, but beneath them sat something unexpected. Bundles of letters, hundreds of them, each addressed to different families across Millbrook. Confused, Emma opened one. The letter described overdue medical bills for a struggling single mother. Another mentioned an elderly veteran losing his home. Another described a young student unable to afford college tuition. Emma's eyes widened. Grandpa had secretly been helping people for years. At the bottom of the chest sat one final note. Real wealth should change lives, not destroy families. Emma sat silently for several minutes staring at the letters. And suddenly, she understood Grandpa's true final surprise. This inheritance was never meant to make her rich. It was meant to make her continue his kindness. Months later, workers transformed part of the Carter mansion into a community support center for struggling families and elderly residents. The Western Barn became a free workshop program where teenagers could learn woodworking and repair skills. Above the mansion entrance, Emma placed a bronze sign, Walter Carter House, built on love, not greed. The grand reopening attracted nearly the entire town. People shared stories Emma had never heard before. How Grandpa secretly paid hospital bills. How he repaired homes for free during harsh winters. How he bought groceries for families who couldn't afford food. Emma realized her grandfather's greatest legacy had never been money. It was compassion. That evening, after everyone left, Emma sat alone on the porch swing overlooking the countryside sunset. The air smelled of pine trees and fresh rain. For the first time in months, the mansion no longer felt haunted by betrayal. It felt alive again. She held Grandpa's final letter in her hands while golden sunlight covered the fields. Richard and Diane had lost nearly everything chasing greed. But Emma had gained something far more valuable. Peace. A soft breeze moved across the porch as tears filled her eyes one last time. I hope I made you proud. She whispered toward the fading sunset. And somehow, in the quiet warmth of that moment, she felt Grandpa beside her again. Not in the mansion. Not in the money, but in the kindness he left behind. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge was never destroying the people who betrayed her. It was proving that love could survive them.